If you're feeling angry, resentful, and downright drained from other people and aren't sure what to do about it, then this podcast is for you. Be sure to listen. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things and build resilience so you can feel better in your body, enjoy your life again, and maybe even love nursing again. Welcome to the Resilient Nurse Podcast.
Hey there, Jen Barnes. I'm here because I've been thinking a lot about boundaries lately. And as I've been reflecting on my 22 years plus in the mental health field, it's really obvious to me that a lot of us, especially women, just weren't taught about boundaries, right? Like it's just not something we were taught. We were taught to, just get along and play nice and all those things. And which pretty much gave us the message that conflict wasn't okay. And then that indirectly means boundaries aren't okay because, sometimes when we set a boundary, that means conflict can ensue. And so, something that I've noticed a lot of my female clients struggle with is what are boundaries, how to set boundaries, and what to do after you set them, especially if people don't like it. And two, like how to deal with conflict, right? And so the problem is, and this is a problem because what happens is when we don't set boundaries, people end up violating them, right? And then we feel anger and resentment, which it's understandable we would, right? Our anger and resentment is our body's way of saying, something's not going okay here. It's totally understandable. But the problem is that anger and resentment builds up and can eventually come out in hurtful ways, like ways that can damage relationships and ways that just aren't aligned with who and how we want to be in the world. And so the question is why don't people set boundaries more often if we know that it's like a good and healthy thing to do and actually is healthy for relationships? And I've noticed some things over the course of my practice. I've noticed that most people are afraid of someone getting mad at them or around them or expressing anger towards them, or that in some way setting a boundary, asking to have a need met or even a want met might in some way damage the relationship or impact it negatively in some way. I've noticed some people have a long history of complex trauma where, setting a boundary was met with abuse. And so certainly, it's understandable that it would be terrifying to set a boundary. And that's something we want to work through so that we're ready to set boundaries. And some people just don't know what to do, right? Because this just hasn't been taught to most of us. And the truth is sometimes when we set boundaries, some people will get mad and they will direct that anger towards us, especially if they've been benefiting from our lack of boundaries. But here's the truth: their anger is not about you. Let me say that again. Their anger about your boundary is not about you. At that moment, they're focused primarily on their own wants and needs and getting those wants and needs met. In that moment, they're not considering your wants and needs, not because they're bad, we all do this, but because they're focused on what they want and need. They're not thinking about like, oh, well, it'd be really good if Jen, got to benefit from this by her no, right? And so there's ways that we can work with this. And that's why boundaries are so important. They communicate our discomfort so that the other person can then understand where we're coming from. But I figured out some ways that we can work with people who do get mad at us or what we do when people get upset when we set boundaries. And so the first most important thing in general, really, but also in pretty much all social interactions, is that we first notice, acknowledge, and validate our own experiences. So it's understandable that we feel, uncomfortable if someone's getting mad at us or around us or whatever, even if they're not directly mad at us, but rather mad at the boundary, right? And then we can do the same thing for them because it's understandable that they don't like our boundaries. So if we can say, like, hey, I really get that this frustrates you or that this isn't your first choice, or, of course you're angry. Like, I would be too. And then say, I get it. And this is what's okay for me right now. This is what I can do right now, or this is what I need right now. Right. If they happen to be getting nasty in some way or aggressive, what we can do is validate, It's okay with me that you're upset. It's okay with me that you're angry or name whatever feeling they're having. But it's not okay that you're doing and then describe the behavior. So let's say they're mad and they're pounding on the table. Oh, that shook the video. um, let's say they're mad and they're pounding on the table. You could say, like, it's okay. It's valid that you're angry. But it's not okay that you're pounding on the table. I'd like to have a conversation about this, but that pounding on the table is not okay with me. Right. And holding firm to that. And if they don't stop, you can say, you know what? I'd love to have this conversation sometime in a way where we can both, be in a calmer space or whatever it is that you need. Right. If you happen to be open to negotiating what your boundary is, then if they're like, well, would you be willing to do this? Then you can certainly do that. But sometimes we're just not. Sometimes we just feel pretty strong about it. So then we just do like the broken record approach. So we can say like, "Hey, I know this isn't your first choice. I get that you don't like it. I understand that. It's just that this is what I need right now or this is what's okay for me right now." And just, stick to our boundary that way. One thing I'll say is that we do not need to explain our reasoning for why we're setting the boundary. We can choose to do that depending on the relationship and the situation. Some people, it actually makes it worse if you explain because they just try and find holes in why you're saying no and argue with you when the fact of the matter is you're not going to change your mind if you decide that, right? Or you don't want to change your mind. So sometimes explaining can actually make setting the boundary much harder. And, as a chronic over explainer, which if you've been in my space for any length of time, you're well aware of. um, but as a chronic over explainer, I often have to remind myself that no is a complete sentence, right? So we don't have to explain it. The truth is some people will leave. Some people will stay and some people will leave. And both are a good thing. Because what I would ask is, what kind of relationship is it that you have? If the only way it works is that you're having to do things that you're uncomfortable with or not okay with just to maintain the relationship. So it's something to think about, right? And I want to leave us with a quote from Brene Brown. Before we do that, though, I want to share one last thought about boundaries. Something I feel really strongly about boundaries is that boundaries create safety in relationship. And so I'll share when my mom died in 2019, I had friends ask, "What do you need from me right now?" And I said, "Well, the first thing I need is to know that when you're not in a space for me to express my grief or sadness or talk about my mom or whatever, I need you to tell me, Jen, I can't do this right now." And the reason I needed that is because even if I was upset or I wanted support, I can get that elsewhere. I don't need someone to be uncomfortable or force themselves to do it and then end up getting resentful because I knew what would happen is that if they did that, eventually they'd be like, I can't handle it anymore, and it would either end the relationship or make things really weird or uncomfortable or hard or distanced or something. And so a lot of times, setting boundaries actually creates safety in relationships. I have a friend who's just really good at setting boundaries, and I know that I can just be me around her. And if something isn't okay, she'll be like, "What are you doing? Or why are you saying that? I'm not okay with that." And so then I don't have to tiptoe around like, "Oh, is she mad at me? Is she mad at me?" Because I just know that she's going to be straightforward. So I think that's just something else, us people who tend to be a little more tentative about boundaries, that we forget that actually boundaries in healthy relationships can create a sense of safety. So now I'll leave you with a favorite quote from Brene Brown, and it's a longer one. So I'm actually going to read it to you because it's kind of lengthy, but it's my absolute favorite, and I think is really important for people to hear, especially if we're having a hard time setting boundaries. Brene Brown says, "Very early on in my work, I discovered that the most compassionate people I interviewed also have the most well-defined and well-respected boundaries." She says, "It surprised me at the time, but now I get it. They assume that other people are doing the best they can, but that they also ask for what they need and they don't put up with a lot of crap. Compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it." They're compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment. I invite you to really reflect on that and think about the boundaries you want to set and maybe how perhaps it is a compassionate act and something that can actually help the relationship rather than hurt it. All right, that's all I got for today. Take care.